The scent of charred flour filled the cramped kitchen of the rundown boarding house in Yuma, Arizona, and Delilah Sutton knew what was coming before she even heard his heavy boots on the wooden floor. She had been awake since before dawn, her hands trembling as she tried to prepare breakfast for the boarders, but exhaustion and fear had made her clumsy, distracted. The biscuits had burned, their bottoms blackened beyond what anyone would consider edible, and now her husband Walter would make her pay for it, just like he made her pay for every other small mistake she committed in his eyes. It was April of 1873, and spring in the Arizona Territory brought scorching heat, even in the early morning hours, making the kitchen feel like a furnace as she stood there dreading what came next. Walter burst through the door, his face already red with anger, his eyes wild with the kind of rage that came from a night of drinking and gambling away money they did not have. He grabbed the pan from the stove, looked at the ruined biscuits, and then, without a word, struck her across the face with the back of his hand. Delilah stumbled backward, catching herself on the counter, tasting blood in her mouth. She was 22 years old, though she felt decades older, worn down by 3 years of marriage to a man who saw her as nothing more than property to be used and discarded at his whim. "You stupid woman," Walter snarled, advancing on her. "Can't even make a decent breakfast. What good are you?" Before he could strike her again, a voice came from the doorway, calm and steady as a river stone. "I prefer them a little dark." Both Delilah and Walter turned to see a tall cowboy standing in the entrance to the kitchen, his hat in his hands, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp and assessing. He was one of the boarders, a man who had checked in 3 days earlier and kept mostly to himself. Delilah knew his name was Lucas Crawford, that he worked as a horse wrangler and cattle driver, and that he paid his rent on time without complaint. What she did not know was why he was intervening now, why he was risking Walter's wrath for the sake of some burned biscuits. Walter's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "This is none of your concern, Crawford. This is between me and my wife." "I am making it my concern," Lucas said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "The lady made breakfast for all of us boarders. If I say the biscuits are fine, then they are fine. No need for any unpleasantness." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Delilah held her breath, waiting to see what Walter would do. Her husband was a bully and a coward at heart, the kind of man who only showed strength when facing someone weaker than himself. Lucas Crawford was taller than Walter by several inches, broader in the shoulders, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced real danger and survived. After a long moment, Walter backed down, muttering something under his breath about interfering strangers and ungrateful wives. "Just get breakfast on the table," Walter snapped at Delilah before storming out of the kitchen. Delilah stood there, her hand pressed to her stinging cheek, not quite believing what had just happened. Lucas remained in the doorway, studying her with those steady gray eyes of his. He was perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with dark brown hair that needed a trim and a weathered face that spoke of long days under the desert sun. There was something about him that made her feel both safe and terrified at the same time, as if he could see right through all her carefully constructed walls to the broken woman underneath. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lucas nodded once. "Those biscuits really are fine, madam. I have eaten far worse on the trail." He left the kitchen then, and Delilah was alone with her thoughts and her bruised face and the pan of burned biscuits that had somehow become the catalyst for something she could not yet name. She finished preparing breakfast in a daze, her mind replaying the scene over and over. No one had ever stood up for her before. Not her father, who had sold her to Walter to pay off a gambling debt. Not the other boarders, who turned blind eyes to the sounds of violence that sometimes echoed through the thin walls. Not the townspeople, who believed that what happened between a man and his wife was private business. But Lucas Crawford had stood up for her, a stranger, a man who owed her nothing. The rest of the day passed in its usual exhausting routine. Delilah cleaned rooms, washed linens, prepared meals, and tried to avoid Walter as much as possible. Her husband left mid-morning to go to the saloon, as he did most days, leaving her to run the boarding house on her own. It was hard work, back-breaking and endless, but she preferred it to his company. The bruise on her cheek darkened as the hours went by, a purple and yellow reminder of her failure and his cruelty. That evening, as she was serving supper, Lucas caught her eye and gave her a small nod. It was such a simple gesture, barely noticeable to anyone else, but it made her heart skip in her chest. She told herself not to be foolish, that his kindness meant nothing, that he was just a decent man who would move on soon enough and forget all about her. But some small part of her, the part that remembered what it was like to hope for better things, refused to listen to reason. Over the next several days, a pattern developed. Walter would find fault with something Delilah did. His temper would flare, and somehow Lucas would appear, his presence alone enough to defuse the situation. He never raised his voice, never threatened Walter directly, but there was something about him that made other men think twice before acting on their worst impulses. Delilah found herself looking for him, listening for his footsteps, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and shame that she needed protecting at all. It was nearly a week after the burned biscuit incident when Lucas found her alone in the back courtyard, hanging laundry in the brutal afternoon heat. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the world into a shimmering haze. She had tied her dark blonde hair back with a faded ribbon, but strands had escaped to stick to her damp forehead and neck. Her dress, which had been mended so many times it was more patch than original fabric, clung to her thin frame. "Mrs. Sutton," Lucas said, approaching carefully as if afraid he might startle her. "I was wondering if I might have a word with you." Delilah glanced around nervously, checking to make sure Walter was nowhere in sight. "My husband would not approve of me talking to you alone, Mr. Crawford. Your husband is at the saloon. I just saw him there." Lucas moved closer, keeping his voice low. "Madam, I need you to understand something. What he does to you, it is not right. You do not deserve to be treated that way." Tears sprang to Delilah's eyes before she could stop them. "You do not understand. I have nowhere else to go. No money, no family who would take me in. This is my life now." "It does not have to be," Lucas said gently. "There are people who can help, places you could go." She shook her head, wiping roughly at her tears. "You are kind to say so, but you do not know Walter. He would find me. He would make me pay for leaving. It is better to just endure." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if he were wrestling with something. Finally, he said, "My mother endured too. She endured until my father killed her when I was 14 years old. I have regretted every day since that I was not big enough, not strong enough, not brave enough to stop him. I will not make that mistake again." The raw honesty in his words took Delilah's breath away. She stared at him, seeing him fully for the first time, not just as her protector or as a boarder, but as a man who carried his own wounds, his own regrets. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry that happened to you." "I am not telling you to make you feel sorry for me," Lucas said. "I am telling you because I recognize the signs, the way you flinch when anyone moves too fast, the way you make yourself small, as if you are trying to disappear, the bruises you try to hide. I know where this road leads, Mrs. Sutton, and I cannot stand by and watch it happen again." Delilah wanted to tell him that she appreciated his concern, but that he should focus on his own life and leave her to hers. She wanted to protect him from Walter's wrath, from getting tangled up in a situation that was not his responsibility. But the words would not come. Instead, she found herself asking, "What would you have me do?" "Let me help you," Lucas said simply. "I have some money saved up, enough to get you on a stage to California or back east, somewhere he could not find you. You could start over, make a new life for yourself." It was a beautiful fantasy, the kind of dream Delilah had long ago stopped allowing herself to indulge in. But reality was harsh and unforgiving, especially for women in the Arizona Territory in 1873. "Even if I agreed, even if I took your money and ran, what kind of life would I have? A woman alone, with no husband, no protection? I would end up in a worse situation than this one." Lucas looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made. "Then do not go alone. Come with me. I have a small ranch about 30 miles north of here, up near the Gila River. It is not much, just a few hundred acres and a cabin, but it is mine. You could stay there, be safe. I would not ask anything of you that you were not willing to give. Just a chance for both of us to have something better than what we have now." Delilah felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Was he truly suggesting what she thought he was suggesting? "Mr. Crawford, are you asking me to run away with you?" "I am asking you to choose life over slow death," Lucas said, "whatever that looks like for you. If you want me to just give you the money and point you toward the stage depot, I will do that. If you want to come north with me, I will take you and ask for nothing in return, except maybe someone to talk to over supper now and then. I am not looking to replace one bad situation with another, Mrs. Sutton. I am just offering you a choice." She wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to say yes. But fear held her back. Fear of the unknown. Fear of Walter's revenge. Fear that this was all too good to be true and would somehow end in even more pain. "I need time to think about it," she finally said. Lucas nodded. "I understand, but do not take too long. I have seen how your husband looks at you lately. Like he is building up to something worse than a slap or a shove. Please, Mrs. Sutton, think carefully about what kind of future you want." He left her there among the flapping sheets in the blazing sun, her mind spinning with possibilities she had thought were forever closed to her. That night, as Walter snored drunkenly beside her in their bed, Delilah stared at the ceiling and imagined a different life, a life where she did not have to walk on eggshells, where she could breathe freely, where maybe, just maybe, she could find some measure of happiness. It seemed impossible, a fairy tale told to naive girls who did not know any better. But Lucas Crawford had offered her that fairy tale, and she found herself wanting to believe in it despite everything she knew about the cruel realities of the world. The decision was made for her 2 days later when Walter came home in a rage over losing badly at cards. He had been drinking heavily, and his eyes had that vacant, dangerous look that Delilah had learned to fear above all else. She tried to stay out of his way, but the boarding house was small, and there was nowhere to hide. He found her in the kitchen, preparing supper, and started yelling about debts and worthless wives, and how everything would be better if she would just die, and let him collect on her life insurance policy, such as it was. When he grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the wall hard enough to make her vision go dark at the edges, Delilah knew that Lucas had been right. Walter was building up to something worse, something final. She clawed at his hands, gasping for air, and just when she thought she might pass out, Walter released her and stalked out of the kitchen, leaving her crumpled on the floor. She lay there for several minutes, coughing and crying, her throat burning. Then, moving as if in a dream, she got to her feet and went to her room. She owned very little, barely enough to fill a small carpet bag, a few dresses, some undergarments, a brush, a photograph of her mother, who had died when Delilah was 12. She packed it all with shaking hands, then went to find Lucas Crawford. He was in his room, mending a bridle, when she knocked on his door. One look at her face, at the bruises already forming on her throat, and his expression hardened into something cold and furious. "That is it," he said. "We are leaving. Tonight." "He will come after us," Delilah said, her voice hoarse and painful. "Let him try," Lucas said grimly. "I have dealt with men like him before. He is a coward at heart. Once he realizes you are truly gone and that you have someone willing to fight for you, he will slink back to his bottle and his card games and find someone else to torment." Delilah wanted to believe him, but she had lived with Walter's obsessive need for control for too long. "You do not know him like I do. He will see it as a challenge. He will want to prove that he owns me. Then I will make it very clear to him that he does not," Lucas said. He stood up, gathering his own belongings with practiced efficiency. "Pack whatever food you can carry without it being noticed. We will leave as soon as it is fully dark. I have 2 horses stabled at the livery. We can be 10 miles away before anyone realizes we are gone." They moved through the evening with careful purpose. Delilah prepared supper for the boarders as usual, her hands steady despite the panic fluttering in her chest. Walter did not return for the meal, which was a blessing. The other boarders ate and retired to their rooms, none of them paying particular attention to her or to Lucas. Why would they? They were just the help and a transient cowboy beneath notice. When darkness finally fell and the boarding house settled into sleep, Delilah met Lucas at the back door. He had already retrieved the horses and had them waiting in the alley behind the building. They were good animals, sturdy and calm, the kind that could handle a long journey through difficult terrain. Lucas helped her mount, his hands gentle but firm, and then swung up onto his own horse with the ease of someone who had spent half his life in the saddle. They rode north out of Yuma at a steady pace, not so fast as to draw attention, but not so slow that they wasted time. The desert night was surprisingly cold after the brutal heat of the day, and Delilah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Above them, the stars blazed in the clear sky, more stars than she had ever seen, like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The land stretched out in all directions, vast and empty and beautiful in its own harsh way. Neither of them spoke for the first hour. Delilah kept expecting to hear shouts behind them, the thunder of pursuing hooves, Walter's voice screaming her name. But there was only the soft sound of their horses' hooves on the packed earth, the occasional call of a night bird, the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. Slowly, gradually, she began to believe that they might actually make it. "How are you holding up?" Lucas finally asked, his voice low and concerned. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this is all a dream," Delilah admitted. "That I am still in that kitchen with his hands around my throat." "It is real," Lucas assured her. "You are free of him. Whatever happens next, you will never have to go back to that life." They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses and share some of the food Delilah had packed. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, they reached a small creek lined with cottonwood trees. Lucas declared they would rest here for a few hours, let the horses drink and graze, and give themselves time to recover from the long ride. Delilah slid from her horse, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She had not slept in over 24 hours, and the emotional toll of leaving was catching up with her. Lucas spread out a bedroll in the shade of the trees and insisted she rest while he kept watch. She wanted to protest, to tell him that she was not so fragile that she needed constant care, but her body betrayed her. The moment she lay down, sleep claimed her. She woke several hours later to find Lucas sitting nearby, his rifle across his lap, scanning the horizon. The sun was high overhead now, the heat building toward its midday peak. "Any sign of trouble?" she asked, sitting up and trying to smooth her tangled hair. "Nothing," Lucas said. "I think we have a good lead on anyone who might try to follow. We will rest here until late afternoon, then ride through the evening again. By tomorrow, we should reach my ranch." Delilah nodded, accepting the canteen of water he offered her. As she drank, she studied him in the daylight, really looking at him, for perhaps the first time, without fear clouding her judgment. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, with strong features and kind eyes. There was a scar along his jawline, old and faded, and his hands bore the calluses of hard work. He looked like a man who could be trusted, who kept his promises. She hoped desperately that her instincts were right. "Why did you do this?" she asked suddenly. "Why risk so much for someone you barely know?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I told you about my mother. What I did not tell you was that there was a man, a neighbor, who knew what was happening to her. He saw the bruises, heard the screaming, but he never did anything. He told me years later, after my father died in a bar fight, that he regretted his inaction every day, that he should have been brave enough to intervene. I swore then that if I ever found myself in a similar situation, I would not make the same mistake." "But this is different," Delilah said. "You are not just intervening. You are changing the entire course of your life. What if Walter does come after us? What if there is violence? You could be killed." "Then I would die knowing I did the right thing," Lucas said simply. "Some things are worth fighting for. Mrs. Sutton, some things are worth dying for. Human dignity is one of them." Tears filled Delilah's eyes again. She seemed to cry more in the past few days than she had in the past 3 years combined. "I do not even know how to thank you. I do not know how to repay this debt." "There is no debt," Lucas said firmly. "You do not owe me anything. I want you to understand that, truly understand it. When we get to the ranch, you will have your own space. The cabin is small, but there is a loft area that is separate from the main room. You can sleep there, have your privacy. I will not press you for anything, not companionship, not affection, nothing. You will be safe to heal and to figure out what you want your life to look like going forward." His words were like a balm to her wounded soul. "You are a good man, Lucas Crawford. The world needs more men like you." A faint smile crossed his face. "I am just a man trying to do better than the one who came before me. That is all any of us can hope for." They rested through the hottest part of the day, conserving their strength and the horse's energy. Delilah found herself relaxing in Lucas's presence, the constant tension that had been her companion for 3 years slowly beginning to ease. They talked, small conversations about inconsequential things at first, and then deeper discussions about their lives, their dreams, their regrets. She learned that Lucas had been orphaned at 14 after his father's death, that he had worked his way west doing odd jobs and manual labor, that he had saved every penny for years to buy his small ranch. He had dreams of building it into something substantial, a place where he could raise horses and cattle, where he could live on his own terms. In turn, Delilah told him about her childhood, about her mother's gentle nature, and her father's weakness for gambling. She spoke of the dreams she had once harbored of becoming a teacher, of having a family of her own, built on love and mutual respect. Walter had stolen those dreams from her, had convinced her that she was worthless and deserved nothing better than his abuse. But sitting here under the cottonwood trees with Lucas Crawford, she felt those old dreams stirring back to life. As afternoon bled into evening, they mounted up and continued north. The landscape gradually shifted from pure desert to something slightly greener as they approached the Gila River Valley. Delilah could see mountains in the distance, their peaks dark against the fading sky. The air smelled different here, less dry, with a hint of moisture from the river. It felt like crossing into another world entirely. Leaving the nightmare of her past behind in the scorching streets of Yuma, they reached Lucas's ranch just after dawn the next day. Delilah had been dozing in the saddle, exhausted beyond measure, and almost missed it when Lucas announced they were home. She blinked her eyes open and looked around, taking in the sight of a small but sturdy cabin made of logs and adobe, a barn that had seen better days but still stood straight, corrals that needed mending, and beyond it all, the silver ribbon of the Gila River winding through green banks. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a place carved out of the wilderness through determination and hard work. "It is not much," Lucas said, sounding almost apologetic. "But it is honest land, earned with honest labor." "It is perfect," Delilah said, and meant it. After years of living in the cramped, dirty boarding house that smelled of old cooking grease and unwashed men, this place felt like paradise. Lucas helped her dismount and showed her inside the cabin. It was a single large room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, a cooking area, and a bed in one corner. A ladder led up to a loft space under the eaves, just as he had described. The furnishings were sparse but functional, everything a man living alone would need, and nothing more. "The loft is yours," Lucas said. "I will stay down here. There is a creek just beyond the barn where you can wash up, and I will get a fire going so we can have a hot meal. You should rest. You have been through an ordeal." Delilah wanted to help, wanted to prove that she could earn her keep, but her body had other ideas. The moment she climbed the ladder and lay down on the narrow bed in the loft, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke many hours later to the smell of cooking food and the sound of Lucas moving around below. The sun was setting, painting the cabin's interior in warm orange light. She descended the ladder slowly, her muscles stiff and sore from the long ride, and found Lucas stirring a pot over the fire. "Good evening," he said with a smile. "I was starting to think you might sleep straight through to tomorrow. I hope you like stew because that is about the extent of my cooking abilities." "Stew sounds wonderful," Delilah said. And it did. When was the last time someone had cooked for her? She could not remember. They ate together at the table, the simple meal of beef and vegetables tasting better than anything Delilah had eaten in years. Maybe it was the freedom that seasoned it, the knowledge that no one would criticize her or strike her or make her feel small. Or maybe Lucas was a better cook than he gave himself credit for. Either way, she found herself relaxing, actually enjoying the moment for what it was. "Tomorrow I need to ride into the town of Florence and check on some business matters," Lucas said as they cleaned up after the meal. "It is about 10 miles east of here. You are welcome to come with me, or you can stay here and rest, whatever you prefer." "I think I would like to stay here, if that is all right," Delilah said. "I am not quite ready to face other people yet." "Perfectly understandable," Lucas said. "I will leave you the rifle and show you how to use it, just in case. Though I doubt anyone will bother you out here. We do not get many visitors." That night, lying in the loft with a cool breeze coming through the small window, Delilah felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Real, tangible hope that her life could be different. That she could be more than just a victim, surviving from one day to the next. Lucas Crawford had given her a gift more precious than gold. He had given her a chance to become whole again. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Lucas worked on mending fences and fixing up the barn, while Delilah slowly took over the household tasks. She cooked and cleaned, not because she was forced to, but because she wanted to contribute, wanted to show her gratitude in the ways she knew how. Lucas never demanded anything, never made her feel obligated. He treated her with a respect and kindness that was so foreign to her experience that sometimes she found herself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to reveal his true nature. But that revelation never came. Lucas was exactly what he appeared to be, a decent man trying to live an honest life. He worked hard from sunrise to sunset, came home tired but never angry, shared meals with her, and conversation that ranged from silly to serious. He made her laugh, something she had not done in years. He listened when she talked about her fears and her dreams. He never pushed her for more than she was willing to give. Weeks passed, and Delilah began to truly settle into her new life. She started a small garden near the cabin, planting vegetables and herbs. She sewed new curtains for the windows using fabric Lucas brought back from town. She learned to ride better, and sometimes in the evenings they would take the horses out and explore the land around the ranch, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. It was during these rides that Delilah began to realize her feelings for Lucas were changing, deepening into something more than gratitude. She found herself noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands despite their strength, the sound of his voice reading aloud from a book in the evenings. She caught herself thinking about what it would be like to reach out and touch him, to close the distance between them that he maintained so carefully out of respect for her boundaries. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had sworn to herself that she would never trust another man, never give anyone that kind of power over her again. But Lucas was different. Everything about him was different. One evening in early June, nearly 2 months after their escape from Yuma, they were sitting outside the cabin watching the stars emerge. The night was warm and pleasant, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant call of an owl. Delilah had been quiet all evening, wrestling with her thoughts, trying to find the courage to speak what was in her heart. "Lucas," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, turning to look at her with those steady gray eyes. "Do you ever think about the future, about what you want your life to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now?" Lucas considered the question carefully. "I think about it sometimes. I would like to expand the ranch, build up the herd, maybe add on to the cabin, make it more comfortable, have a real home, not just a place to sleep between work. Why do you ask?" Delilah gathered her courage. "Do you ever think about having a family, a wife, children?" She saw something flicker across his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "I used to think about it. Before I met you, I assumed I would probably live out my days alone. Most women want a man who can offer them more than a struggling ranch and a small cabin. But lately I have been thinking maybe, someday, if the right person came along, and if she was willing, I might like to have those things. A partner to share the burden and the joy, children to pass the ranch on to, a real family built on trust and respect." Delilah's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he could hear it. And what if the right person was already here? What if she wanted those same things? Lucas went very still. "Delilah, I need you to be very clear about what you were saying. I do not want there to be any misunderstanding. I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated because I helped you. Whatever you are feeling, it needs to be real, and it needs to be yours, not something born out of gratitude or fear or a sense of debt." "It is real," Delilah said, her voice growing stronger. "I have had 2 months to think about this, to figure out what I feel. At first, yes, it was gratitude. You saved my life, gave me a home, asked for nothing in return. But it has become more than that. I find myself happy to see you each morning. I miss you when you are gone. I think about what it would be like to truly build a life with you, not as a guest in your home, but as your partner, your wife. I know I come with damage, with scars that may never fully heal. I know I am not the fresh young bride that most men want. But if you would have me, if you could be patient with me as I learn to trust again, I would like very much to try." Lucas reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His touch was warm and careful, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "Delilah Sutton, you are the strongest, bravest person I have ever met. What you see as damage, I see as proof that you are a survivor. I would be honored to have you as my wife, to build a life with you, but I want you to be absolutely certain. There is no rush. We can take all the time you need." "I am certain," Delilah said, and as the words left her lips, she knew they were true. This was not the frantic, desperate love of youth. This was something deeper, something forged in shared hardship and mutual respect. This was the kind of love that could weather storms and last a lifetime. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Florence. It was a simple ceremony, attended by a handful of townspeople who had come to respect Lucas during his years in the area. Delilah wore a new dress that Lucas had bought for her, pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. She felt beautiful for the first time in years, not because of the dress, but because of the way Lucas looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in the world. The preacher who married them was an older man named Reverend Thomas, who asked no questions about Delilah's past or her previous marriage. In the Arizona Territory of 1873, many people came west to escape something, and wise men knew when to keep their curiosity to themselves. He pronounced them husband and wife. Lucas kissed her gently, and just like that, Delilah began the next chapter of her life. Their wedding night was tender and careful. Lucas let Delilah set the pace, never pushing, always asking if she was comfortable, if she wanted to continue. It was so different from her experiences with Walter that at one point she started crying, overcome with the realization of what intimacy could be when it was based on love and consent rather than ownership and force. Lucas held her, whispering reassurances, telling her they had all the time in the world. By the time morning came, Delilah felt as though she had been reborn. The summer passed in a haze of happiness. They worked side by side on the ranch, expanding the garden, repairing buildings, caring for the animals. Lucas taught Delilah to shoot, to track, to read the signs of weather and season. She proved to be a quick learner, soaking up knowledge like the parched earth soaked up rain. In turn, she taught him about herbs and healing, about cooking dishes more complex than his basic stew, about creating a home that was more than just functional. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their days and their dreams. Lucas told her stories of his travels, of the places he had seen and the people he had met. Delilah opened up more about her childhood, about her mother who had loved books and music, about the girl she had been before life had beaten the hope out of her. With each conversation, each shared moment, the bond between them grew stronger. In September, Delilah realized she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror. She had always wanted children, but the thought of bringing a child into a world that could be so cruel was frightening. What if she turned out to be a terrible mother? What if something went wrong during the pregnancy? What if the child inherited Walter's temperament rather than Lucas's? When she finally worked up the courage to tell Lucas, his reaction put all her fears to rest. His face lit up with such pure happiness that it took her breath away. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around, laughing like a child himself. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be a family." His joy was infectious, pushing back the shadows of her doubts. That evening, they sat together and talked about names, about how they would need to add on to the cabin, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. Lucas promised that their children would grow up knowing love and security, that they would never have to fear the people who were supposed to protect them. Delilah believed him because Lucas Crawford was a man who kept his promises. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and winter. Lucas became even more attentive, if such a thing were possible, insisting that Delilah rest more and work less. She protested at first, not wanting to be treated like fragile glass, but eventually accepted that he just wanted to take care of her and their unborn child. It was not about control or ownership. It was about love. In early March of 1874, nearly a year after Delilah had burned those morning biscuits and Lucas had spoken the words that changed everything, she went into labor. It was a long, difficult process that lasted through the night and into the next day. Lucas stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, encouraging her even when she was certain she could not go on. The midwife from Florence, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, guided them through it with calm efficiency. When their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Delilah burst into tears of relief and joy. Lucas was crying too, unashamed, as Mrs. Henderson placed the tiny, perfect baby in Delilah's arms. He had a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes, and Delilah fell in love with him instantly. "What should we name him?" Lucas asked, his voice thick with emotion. Delilah had been thinking about this for months. I want to name him after my mother's father. His name was Thomas Crawford. Thomas Crawford, Lucas repeated, testing the name. It is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect. They were exhausted but happier than either had ever thought possible. As the sun set that evening and Mrs. Henderson left them alone with their new son, Delilah looked around the cabin that had become her sanctuary and realized that she had found everything she had ever wanted. Safety, love, family, home. But their happiness was not to remain undisturbed. 3 weeks after Thomas was born, a rider came to the ranch. Delilah was nursing the baby when she heard the hoofbeats approaching. Lucas stepped outside to greet the visitor, and through the window, Delilah saw him stiffen. She could not hear what was being said, but she saw Lucas shake his head firmly, saw him point back toward the road. The rider argued, gesturing wildly, and Delilah's stomach clenched with fear. Had Walter found them? When Lucas finally came back inside, his face was grim. That was a man from Yuma. He said Walter is dead. Delilah's first reaction was relief so intense it made her dizzy. Then came the guilt over feeling relieved about another person's death. How? She managed to ask. Bar fight, apparently. He accused someone of cheating at cards, drew a knife, and got himself shot. He died 2 days later from infection. Lucas sat down heavily at the table. The man came because there are some legal matters to settle. The boarding house was in Walter's name, but since you were his wife, there are questions about inheritance and such. I do not want anything from him, Delilah said immediately. Whatever he had, whoever wants it can have it. I want nothing that ties me to that man or that life. Lucas nodded slowly. I understand, but you should know that legally you are his widow. There may be money owed to you, property that is rightfully yours. You could sell the boarding house, use the money to help build up the ranch, to secure Thomas's future. The thought of returning to Yuma, even briefly, even with Walter dead and gone, made Delilah feel sick. But Lucas was right. They had a son now, responsibilities beyond just themselves. If there was money to be had, money that could give Thomas a better start in life, she owed it to him to at least consider it. Will you come with me? She asked. I cannot face that place alone. Of course, Lucas said without hesitation. We will go together. We will settle everything quickly and be back home before you know it. They made arrangements for Mrs. Henderson to stay at the ranch with Thomas while they made the trip to Yuma. It nearly broke Delilah's heart to leave her baby, even for a few days, but she knew he would be safe with the capable midwife. Lucas promised they would be as fast as possible. The journey back to Yuma felt surreal. The last time Delilah had traveled this road, she had been fleeing for her life, terrified and uncertain. Now she was returning as a different person entirely. She was no longer Delilah Sutton, the abused wife cowering in fear. She was Delilah Crawford, a woman who had found her strength, who had a husband who cherished her, and a son who depended on her. When they arrived in Yuma, the town looked both exactly the same and completely different. The streets were as dusty and crowded as ever, the buildings still weathered and worn by the brutal sun. But, without Walter's shadow hanging over her, Delilah could see it for what it really was. Just a town, neither particularly terrible nor particularly special. The power it had held over her was gone. They dealt with the legal matters efficiently. The boarding house had indeed been in Walter's name, but as his widow, Delilah inherited it along with his meager savings. The lawyer who handled the estate, a thin man with nervous hands, seemed surprised that she wanted to sell everything immediately. He had lined up a buyer, a businessman from back east, looking to invest in Arizona Territory properties, and the sale was completed within 2 days. The amount of money Delilah walked away with was not a fortune, but it was substantial enough to make a real difference. Lucas assured her it was enough to buy more cattle, to properly expand the ranch, to ensure they would never have to worry about going hungry during a hard winter. It was enough to give Thomas and any future children they might have a solid foundation. On their last day in Yuma, Delilah insisted on visiting the boarding house one final time. Lucas offered to come with her, but she needed to do this alone. She walked through the rooms where she had suffered so much, seeing them now with clear eyes. They were just rooms, walls and floors and furniture. They had no power over her anymore. In the kitchen where this had all begun, Delilah stood for a long moment. She could almost smell the burned biscuits, could almost hear Walter's angry voice, and then Lucas's calm one. I prefer them a little dark. 5 simple words that had changed the trajectory of her entire life. She sent a silent thank you to whatever force of fate had brought Lucas Crawford to that boarding house at exactly the right moment, and then she walked out the door and did not look back. They returned to the ranch to find Thomas healthy and happy in Mrs. Henderson's care. Delilah scooped up her son and held him close, breathing in his baby's smell, feeling the pieces of her world settle back into place. This was her life now. This was her family. Everything else was just the past, and the past could not hurt her anymore. The years that followed were good ones. Lucas used the money from the sale of the boarding house to expand the ranch just as he had planned. They bought more cattle and horses, hired a hand to help with the work, added 2 rooms to the cabin, and eventually built an entirely new, larger house to replace it. The ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for its quality livestock. Delilah threw herself into her roles as wife, mother, and ranch partner. She discovered she had a knack for the business side of things, keeping meticulous records and negotiating favorable deals with buyers. Lucas often said she was the brains of the operation, while he was just the muscle, though they both knew it was a true partnership in every sense of the word. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic child with his father's steady temperament and his mother's sharp mind. When he was 3, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Emma. 2 years after that came another son, Henry. The house that had once been a small cabin filled with the noise and chaos of children, and Delilah loved every exhausting minute of it. She never forgot where she had come from, never took for granted the life she had built with Lucas. On difficult days when the children were cranky or the ranch work seemed endless, she would remind herself of those dark mornings in Yuma, of how she had believed she would die in that boarding house without ever knowing real happiness. The contrast made even the hard days feel like gifts. Lucas proved to be everything Delilah had hoped for, and more, as a husband and father. He was patient with the children, teaching them to ride and rope and care for the animals. He was affectionate with Delilah, never letting a day go by without telling her he loved her. He worked hard, but always made time for his family, understanding that some things were more important than money or success. They had their struggles, of course. The ranch life was not easy, and the Arizona territory could be unforgiving. There were droughts and hard winters, sick animals and failed crops, injuries and illnesses that scared them half to death. But they faced everything together, their bond growing stronger with each challenge overcome. Sometimes, usually late at night, after the children were asleep, Delilah and Lucas would sit together on the porch of their house and talk about how far they had come. Lucas would remind her of that first morning, of the burned biscuits and his impulsive decision to intervene. Delilah would laugh and say she still could not make a biscuit to save her life, but at least now if she burned them, no one would hit her for it. "I would still eat them," Lucas would say, pulling her close. "I prefer them a little dark, remember?" And Delilah would remember. She would remember everything. The fear and the pain and the moment when a stranger showed her kindness and changed her world forever. She would remember the long ride north through the desert night, the first time she felt safe, the day they married, the births of their children. All of it, the hard parts and the beautiful parts, woven together into a life worth living. The years continued to pass in the way they do, each one bringing new experiences and challenges. By 1880, Thomas was 6 years old and already showing signs that he would grow into a man much like his father, hard-working, honest, and kind. Emma was 3, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity who kept everyone on their toes. Henry, at 1 year old, was just beginning to walk and getting into everything he could reach. The ranch had grown substantially. What had started as a few hundred acres and a struggling operation was now over 1,000 acres with healthy herds of cattle and horses. Lucas and Delilah had hired several ranch hands, built a proper bunkhouse for them, and established the Crawford Ranch as one of the more successful operations in the territory. They had earned respect in the community, with Lucas serving on the town council in Florence and Delilah helping to establish a school that served the scattered ranching families in the area. One evening in September, as they celebrated their 6th wedding anniversary with a special dinner after the children were in bed, Lucas presented Delilah with a gift. It was a beautiful leather-bound journal, the pages blank and waiting to be filled. "I thought you might like to write down your story," Lucas said, "for the children, so they will know where they came from, so they will understand how strong their mother is." Delilah ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Our story," she corrected gently, "because I would not have a story worth telling without you in it." "Then write our story," Lucas said, kissing her softly. "Write about how a cowboy who could not mind his own business fell in love with the bravest woman he ever met." Delilah did eventually write in that journal, though it took her a while to find the right words. She wrote about her difficult childhood and her disastrous first marriage. She wrote about the morning she burned the biscuits and the cowboy, who said he preferred them a little dark. She wrote about the flight north through the desert, about learning to hope again, about falling in love with a man who showed her what real partnership looked like. She wrote about their children and the ranch and the life they had built together from nothing but determination and faith in each other. When Thomas was old enough to understand, she shared parts of the story with him. She wanted him to know that life could be hard, that people could be cruel, but that courage and kindness could overcome even the darkest circumstances. She wanted him to learn from his father's example, to grow into a man who would stand up for those who could not stand up for themselves. Most of all, she wanted him to understand that family was not just about blood. It was about choice, about commitment, about choosing to love someone even when it was difficult. As Thomas grew older, he took these lessons to heart. He was gentle with his younger siblings, protective without being controlling. He worked hard on the ranch, but never complained. He showed the same steady character that had drawn Delilah to Lucas all those years ago. Watching her son grow into such a fine young man filled Delilah with a pride so fierce it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. Emma, meanwhile, inherited her mother's determination and her father's sense of justice. She announced at age 5 that she intended to become a doctor, a lofty goal for a girl in the Arizona Territory of the 1880s, but one that Delilah and Lucas supported wholeheartedly. If anyone could achieve such an ambitious dream, it would be their fierce, brilliant daughter. They began saving money specifically for her education, determined that none of their children would be held back by lack of opportunity. Henry was still too young to show much of his personality, but he was a happy, affectionate child who seemed to find joy in everything around him. He loved the animals especially, and Lucas predicted he would be a natural horseman. Delilah just hoped he would be happy, whatever path he chose in life. In 1881, tragedy struck the community when a fire swept through Florence, destroying several buildings, including the school Delilah had helped establish. No one was killed, but the loss was devastating to the families who depended on that school for their children's education. Delilah immediately began organizing efforts to rebuild, rallying the ranching community to donate materials and labor. Lucas was proud of how his wife had grown, from the frightened woman he had first met into a leader the community turned to in times of crisis. She had found her voice and her strength, and she used both to make the world around her better. The school was rebuilt within 6 months, larger and better than before, a testament to what people could accomplish when they worked together. That same year, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This 4th pregnancy was harder than the previous ones had been. She was now 29 years old, and her body seemed to struggle more with the demands of carrying a child. Lucas worried constantly, insisting she rest more and do less. Delilah tried to comply, but it was hard for someone as naturally active as she had become to simply sit still. In April of 1882, after a long and difficult labor that scared both of them, Delilah gave birth to twin girls. The babies were small but healthy, and Lucas wept openly at the sight of his 2 new daughters. They named them Rose and Lily, flower names for girls born in the spring. With 5 children now, the Crawford house was chaotic and loud and full of more love than Delilah had ever imagined possible. The twins kept both parents busy for the next several years. Having 2 infants at once was exponentially more challenging than one, and there were many nights when Lucas and Delilah walked the floor with crying babies, exhausted beyond reason, but refusing to complain. Thomas, now 8, helped with his younger siblings, showing a patience and maturity beyond his years. Emma, at 5, tried to help, but often created more chaos than assistance with her enthusiastic efforts. Henry, at 3, was mostly just fascinated by having 2 babies in the house instead of 1. Through it all, Lucas and Delilah leaned on each other, their partnership deepening with each shared challenge. They had been through so much together: the dramatic escape from Yuma, the early struggles of building the ranch, the births of their children, the ups and downs of ranch life, and community involvement. Every experience had strengthened the bond between them, forging something that felt unbreakable. By 1885, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm once more. Thomas was 11 and had begun taking on real responsibilities around the ranch. Emma was 8 and still determined to become a doctor, spending all her free time reading every book she could get her hands on. Henry was 6 and proving to be just as good with horses as Lucas had predicted. The twins were 3, identical in appearance, but developing distinctly different personalities. Rose was quiet and thoughtful, while Lily was outgoing and mischievous. One day in late summer, Delilah was working in her garden when she heard a rider approaching. She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a young man dismounting near the house. Something about him seemed familiar, but she could not place him until he removed his hat and she saw his face. It was one of the boarders from the Yuma boarding house, a young man named Charlie who had been kind to her in the small ways he could manage without drawing Walter's wrath. He looked older now, more weathered, but his eyes were the same. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, clearly uncertain of his welcome. "I hope you do not mind me coming here. I heard you were living up this way, and I wanted to see for myself that you were all right. After everything that happened, after Walter died, I always wondered if you had made it out, if you had found some happiness." Delilah set down her gardening tools and approached him, a smile spreading across her face. "Charlie? Of course I remember you. Please come sit. I will get you some water, and you can tell me what brings you all this way." They sat on the porch, and Charlie told her about his life since leaving Yuma. He had saved enough money to buy a small spread near Tucson, was building it up slowly, hoped to marry soon. He seemed happy, and Delilah was glad for him. When he asked about her life, she gave him the brief version: the ranch, her marriage to Lucas, their 5 children, the good life they had built together. "I am glad," Charlie said sincerely. "You deserved better than what you had in Yuma. I always felt bad that none of us did more to help you. We all knew what was happening, but we told ourselves it was not our place to interfere." "One person did interfere," Delilah said softly. "One person was brave enough to stand up, and that made all the difference. Lucas saved my life, Charlie. Not just from Walter's violence, but from the despair that was killing me just as surely. He gave me back my future." As if summoned by his name, Lucas came around the corner of the house, having seen the strange horse and come to investigate. Delilah introduced him to Charlie, and the 2 men shook hands. Lucas invited Charlie to stay for supper, and the young man accepted gratefully. The evening was pleasant, filled with good food and easy conversation. The children were fascinated by their visitor, asking him endless questions about his ranch and his journey. After Charlie had left the next morning, continuing on his way to Florence to conduct some business, Lucas found Delilah in the kitchen. "That was good of you, being so welcoming to him," he said. "I know going back to that time, even in memory, must be difficult." "It was," Delilah admitted, "but it also reminded me of how far I have come. I am not that frightened, broken woman anymore, Lucas. You helped me become someone new, someone stronger." "You were always strong," Lucas corrected gently. "I just gave you a safe place to remember that about yourself." Delilah moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "However it happened, I am grateful every single day. For you, for our children, for this life. I know I do not say it enough, but thank you. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for caring when no one else did, for loving me when I did not think I deserved to be loved." Lucas held her close, his voice thick with emotion. "Delilah Crawford, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every risk, every challenge, all of it. Because you are worth everything." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while outside their children played and the ranch buzzed with activity, and the Arizona sun blazed down on the land they had claimed as their own. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary day, but it was also everything. It was the life they had fought for, the happiness they had earned, the love they had chosen to build together. The years continued to roll forward, bringing with them the expected joys and sorrows of life. In 1887, Lucas's father, the man who had murdered his mother, died in a prison where he had been serving time for another violent crime. Lucas received a letter informing him of the death, and while he felt no grief for the man who had terrorized his childhood, there was a sense of closure. That chapter of his life was finally fully ended. Thomas turned 14 that year and had grown into a tall, capable young man who was essentially running a large portion of the ranch operations under his father's guidance. He had his father's work ethic and his mother's mind for business, a combination that boded well for his future. Emma, at 11, had not wavered in her determination to become a doctor and had begun corresponding with a female physician in California who encouraged her ambitions. Henry, at 9, was indeed a gifted horseman who could gentle even the wildest bronco with patience and kindness. The twins, Rose and Lily, were 5 years old and starting their education at the school their mother had helped rebuild. They were bright girls, quick to learn, and the teachers delighted in them. Rose showed an artistic bent, always drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals. Lily had inherited her mother's way with growing things and loved helping in the garden. In 1888, Delilah turned 37, and Lucas threw her a surprise party that brought together friends and neighbors from all over the territory. It was a grand celebration, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Delilah was overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection, by the realization of how many lives she and Lucas had touched over the years. They were respected members of their community, known for their fairness, their hard work, and their generosity. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Delilah found Lucas sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. She joined him, taking his hand in hers. "Thank you for this," she said. "For all of this. Not just the party, but everything. The life, the love, the family, all of it." "It has been my honor," Lucas said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. 15 years ago, I walked into a kitchen and saw a woman being beaten for burning biscuits. I could not have known then that intervening would lead to this, to us, to the most incredible journey of my life. But I am so grateful it did. "I prefer them a little dark," Delilah quoted, her eyes twinkling. "Those words saved my life." "No," Lucas said seriously. "You saved your own life by being brave enough to leave, brave enough to trust me, brave enough to believe you deserved better. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to help you along the way." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Around them, their children were playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the evening breeze. The ranch stretched out in all directions, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. Inside the house, the kitchen was full of leftover food from the party, and the parlor still had decorations hanging from the rafters. It was a scene of abundance, of happiness, of a life well lived. Delilah thought about the girl she had been, sold by her father to pay a debt. She thought about the frightened woman she had become, trapped in an abusive marriage with no hope of escape. And then she thought about who she was now, a wife, a mother, a rancher, a community leader. The journey from there to here had been long and sometimes painful, but it had been worth every step. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not spoken up that morning?" she asked Lucas. He considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I think Walter would have eventually killed you. I think I would have carried that guilt for the rest of my life, knowing I could have done something and chose not to. I think both of our lives would have been immeasurably poorer for never having known each other." "I think you are right," Delilah said. "I certainly would not be here, and our children would never have been born. It is strange to think how one small moment of courage can change everything. That is why we try to teach the children to always do what is right, even when it is hard," Lucas said, "because you never know when that small act of courage might change someone's entire world." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, their children came running up to the porch, demanding that their parents join them in one last game before bedtime. Delilah and Lucas stood, allowing themselves to be pulled into the chaos and joy of family life. They chased the children around the yard, laughing and shouting, acting more like kids themselves than the responsible adults they were supposed to be. When everyone was finally exhausted and the younger children had been put to bed, Delilah and Lucas returned to their own room. It had been a long, wonderful day, and they were both tired. As they prepared for sleep, Lucas pulled Delilah close, wrapping his arms around her. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Delilah whispered back. "Thank you for showing me what love really means." They fell asleep in each other's arms, just as they had done nearly every night for the past 15 years. Outside, The desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and the ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of night. It was a peaceful scene, a fitting end to a day of celebration. The years that followed brought the expected changes. Children grew and began to forge their own paths. Thomas, at 18, was given full responsibility for one section of the ranch, essentially managing his own operation under the larger Crawford Ranch umbrella. He courted and married a young woman from Florence named Sarah, a teacher's daughter with a kind heart and a sharp mind. They built a small house on the ranch property, and within a year made Lucas and Delilah grandparents with the birth of their son. Emma, at 15, left home to attend a prestigious school for young women in San Francisco, the first step toward achieving her dream of becoming a doctor. It broke Delilah's heart to see her daughter leave, but she was so proud of Emma's determination and drive. They exchanged letters frequently, with Emma sharing details of her studies and Delilah sharing news from home. Henry, at 13, was already being courted by neighboring ranchers who wanted him to work with their horses. He had developed a reputation as someone who could train even the most difficult animals, and his services were in high demand. Lucas and Delilah were proud of his skill, but insisted he finish his education before taking on any outside work. The twins, Rose and Lily, were 9 years old and growing into lovely young ladies. Rose had developed her artistic talents to an impressive degree, and several of her paintings hung in the house. Lily had taken over much of the garden work and was experimenting with cultivating different crops that might thrive in the Arizona climate. Both girls were bright, happy children who had never known anything but love and security. In 1893, on the 20th anniversary of that morning with the burned biscuits, Lucas and Delilah took a trip back to Yuma. Not because they had to, but because Delilah wanted to face her past one final time, to prove to herself that it truly had no power over her anymore. They rode into town on a warm April morning, and Delilah looked around at the streets she had once known so well. The boarding house where she had suffered was gone, torn down years ago to make way for a new hotel. The saloon where Walter had spent so much time still stood, though it looked more run down than she remembered. The general store, the church, the livery stable, all were still there, familiar and yet somehow different. Or perhaps she was the one who was different, so changed from the woman who had fled this place that she could barely recognize the scared girl she had been. They stayed only one night in the new hotel and left the next morning without regret. As they rode north toward home, Delilah realized she felt nothing for Yuma, neither hatred nor fear nor even curiosity. It was just a place, no more significant than any other town in the territory. The power it had once held over her was completely gone. "How do you feel?" Lucas asked as they put miles between themselves and Yuma. "Free," Delilah said simply. "Completely and totally free." They returned home to find the ranch thriving as always. Thomas and Sarah welcomed them back with news that they were expecting their second child. Henry had successfully trained a particularly challenging stallion and had been offered a substantial sum for his services. The twins had completed a large painting together, combining Rose's artistic skill and Lily's eye for color, and it was truly impressive. Even Emma had sent a letter announcing she had been accepted into a medical apprenticeship program, one step closer to her dream. Life was good, better than good. It was everything Delilah had ever hoped for, and more. She and Lucas had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. Their children would carry forward the values they had instilled: hard work, compassion, courage, love. The Crawford Ranch would stand as a testament to what two people could accomplish when they refused to give up on each other or themselves. As the years moved into the mid-1890s, Lucas and Delilah began to slow down, allowing Thomas and the ranch hands to take on more of the daily operations. They were not old, still in their early 40s, but the hard years of building the ranch had taken their toll. They found themselves content to take a less active role, to enjoy their grandchildren, to sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sunsets they had seen thousands of times, but never grew tired of. In 1896, Emma graduated from medical school, one of only a handful of female doctors in the entire Western Territories. The whole family traveled to San Francisco to celebrate her achievement. Delilah wept openly at the ceremony, overwhelmed with pride for her daughter, who had refused to let anyone tell her what she could not do. Emma returned to Arizona to set up a practice in Florence, where she quickly became beloved for her skill and compassion. Henry married at 19, choosing a young woman named Margaret who shared his love of horses. They took over another section of the ranch and began breeding horses specifically for working cattle. The business thrived, adding yet another dimension to the Crawford Ranch's success. The twins, now teenagers, were beginning to develop their own interests and ambitions. Rose wanted to study art in Europe, a dream that seemed impossibly grand, but that Lucas and Delilah supported nonetheless. Lily wanted to stay on the ranch, to continue expanding the agricultural side of the operation. Both paths were equally valid, and their parents encouraged them to follow their hearts. In the spring of 1898, on the 25th anniversary of their escape from Yuma, Lucas and Delilah stood together in the cemetery in Florence, placing flowers on the grave of Mrs. Henderson, the midwife who had helped deliver Thomas and had stayed with him while they made their fateful trip to settle Walter's estate. She had passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, and her loss was deeply felt by the entire community. "She was a good woman," Delilah said softly. "She helped us when we needed it most." "The world needs more people like her," Lucas agreed. "More people willing to show up when others need help." "Like you," Delilah said, taking his hand. "Like you did for me all those years ago." Lucas squeezed her hand gently. "We helped each other, Delilah. That is what love is, showing up every day through the good times and the hard times. We have done that for each other for 25 years now. I hope we get 25 more." They did not get quite 25 more years, but they did get 22. In the summer of 1920, Lucas Crawford passed away at the age of 73, surrounded by his wife, his children, his grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. He died as he had lived, with dignity and peace, his last words a whispered declaration of love for Delilah. His death devastated her, even though they had known it was coming. He had been sick for nearly a year, his heart slowly giving out after a lifetime of hard work. Delilah had cared for him through it all, refusing to let anyone else take on that responsibility. In his final weeks, they had talked about everything: their life together, the children they were so proud of, the ranch they had built from nothing, the love that had sustained them through every challenge. "You made me the man I wanted to be," Lucas told her one afternoon as they sat together on the porch. "You gave me a purpose, a reason to be brave. I have no regrets, Delilah, not a single one." "Neither do I," Delilah said, her voice breaking. "You saved me, Lucas, in every way that a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Lucas corrected gently. "That is the truth of it. We saved each other." After his death, Delilah lived for 7 more years, surrounded by the family they had created together. She remained sharp and engaged, delighting in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, still offering wisdom and guidance to anyone who asked. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, now one of the largest and most successful operations in Arizona, which had achieved statehood in 1912. Delilah passed away in her sleep in February of 1927, at the age of 75. She was buried next to Lucas in the Florence Cemetery, beneath a headstone that read, "Together in life, together in death, together forever." At her funeral, Thomas stood before the gathered crowd, which included family members, friends, townspeople, and even strangers who had been touched by Delilah's kindness over the years. He held the leather journal his father had given his mother all those years ago, the one filled with their story. "My mother wanted me to read something she wrote," Thomas said, his voice steady despite his grief. "She wrote this shortly before she died, as a way of summing up what her life had meant." He opened the journal to a page marked with a ribbon and began to read. "There are moments in every life that define everything that comes after. For me, that moment came on an April morning in 1873, when I burned the biscuits and braced myself for punishment, and a cowboy I barely knew said 5 words that changed my world. I prefer them a little dark." Those words were not really about biscuits, of course. They were about seeing me, about recognizing my humanity when I had almost forgotten it myself. They were about courage and kindness and the willingness to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Lucas Crawford gave me back my life that morning and then spent the next 47 years helping me build that life into something beautiful. We created a family, all a home, a legacy. We loved each other through good times and bad, never wavering, never giving up. If there is anything I want my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren to understand, it is this: love is a choice we make every single day. It is choosing to see the best in someone even when they cannot see it themselves. It is standing up when others sit down. It is refusing to accept that things cannot change, cannot get better. Lucas showed me what real love looks like, and I have tried to pass that lesson on to all of you. Do not settle for cruelty disguised as affection. Do not believe people who tell you that you deserve less than kindness and respect. And if you see someone suffering, be brave enough to speak up. You never know when your words might save a life. Thomas closed the journal, tears streaming down his face. My parents built something incredible together. A love that lasted a lifetime. A family that spans generations. A legacy of compassion and courage. They are together now, as they always were meant to be. And those of us left behind carry their love forward into the future. The funeral ended, and people slowly dispersed, but the story of Delilah and Lucas Crawford lived on. It was told and retold, passed down through generations, becoming family legend. The ranch they built remained in the family, growing and changing with the times, but always maintaining the core values they had established: hard work, integrity, compassion, and above all, love. Their great-great-grandchildren still walk the land they claimed over a century and a half ago. They still tell the story of how their ancestors met, how 5 simple words about burned biscuits sparked a love affair that changed the course of multiple lives. They still hold up Delilah and Lucas as examples of what partnership should look like, of how love can heal even the deepest wounds. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the sun is just beginning to rise over the Arizona desert, casting golden light across the land, it almost feels like Delilah and Lucas are still there, still sitting on the porch of the house they built together, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. Still in love, still together, still proving that even the darkest beginnings can lead to the brightest endings. Their story is not unique in its elements: abuse, escape, new love, family, success. But it is unique in its particulars, in the specific way these two people found each other and chose each other and built something lasting. It is a reminder that ordinary people doing ordinary acts of kindness can create extraordinary ripples that extend far beyond their own lives. The Crawford Ranch stands today as it did then, a testament to what love can build. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original cabin where Lucas brought Delilah still stands, preserved as a reminder of humble beginnings. The land stretches out in all directions, green and productive, supporting cattle and horses and crops. And in the kitchen, hanging on the wall in a place of honor, is a framed photograph from 1888, showing Delilah and Lucas with all 5 of their children. They are smiling, happy, whole, a family built on ashes, rising into something beautiful. This is their story. This is the legacy of a woman who was beaten for burning the morning biscuits, and the cowboy who said he preferred them a little dark. This is proof that love can conquer cruelty, that courage can change lives, that standing up for what is right matters more than anything else. This is the story of Delilah Sutton Crawford and Lucas Crawford, 2 ordinary people who created an extraordinary life together. One day, one choice, one moment of courage at a time.